Thank you for the introduction. I hope that we can learn from Confucius, as recorded in the Analects, especially with modern problems, such as with the nuances and complexity in modern world. For example, some modern cases like the Sophie's choice. If you've heard about the case in which someone was coerced by the Nazi soldier to choose between murdering either one of the children. So because it's a very complicated moral situation in which back then, because if we were to think about Ren, if I were to translate that into humanity, how is it when we think about don't do to others what you don't want to be done to? Of course, typically no one wants to be murdered. Your son, your daughter, none of them want to be murdered. But then how might we not be led into a situation like that? And that gives me an understanding of roughly a paternalism that's using Li. Well, I think propriety, whose sentiment is cultivated through rituals, there are things we have to follow, rules, social mores that we are thrown into the world. We don't have a choice. We don't understand why we have to do certain things a certain way. We just have to follow how people do those things. And maybe there are the wisdom from the sages a long time ago. And of course, things that Confucius identified in the Analects. We could shed some light on this issue. But the problem is that it doesn't make well, the Analects, Confucius, or even later Confucianism, a mere, well, conservative or against freedom. That doesn't make it that way, because typically, if we don't have a choice, we are to follow the rituals, the rules that are passed down, and it sounds like it's not liberal, especially when we think about paternalism. But I hope to understand that as better using Li, how maybe back to the modern Chinese society, there how we interact with each other. There are things that we will understand why it was good for us and how it, in the end, guaranteed our freedom, and we will not be in a position to do things that are inhumane, not of humanity, that if there are situations in which we are coerced to do to others that we don't want to be done to. If this makes sense at all, then we could have a liberal reading of the Analects to bring out why Li doesn't make Confucianism, or at least Confucius, roughly put as someone that's not for freedom. Of course, I think humanity, we are here to make choices we're born into the world. We even, to use Manch's examples that Lisa talks about back at the end of her talk, we do have a choice when we see someone fall into the well, if out of a well cultivated sprout of having that sentiment, we could still choose not to help. Of course, we are not always pulled to do those things that Chinese philosophy doesn't emphasize liberty, freedom, and that liberal understanding of Ren. That makes me look back at the liberal tradition of with J.S. Mill and Immanuel Kant, especially with J.S. Mill. He has the harm principle about, well, of course, it relates to the state. It relates to the state. When it is only when it is when it infringes others' human rights, at least liberty, freedom, that one's freedom be limited. But it seems to be a blatant incompatibility with Li, with something that's very something Confucian, right? So. But Immanuel Kant, his formula of let me see, humanity, treating others as an end in itself. If we are to formalize that as roughly something as an intention matching. So if I respect someone else, so I do all and only that person wants me to do. That it includes what I do to that person, and that entails the gold. Let me see. That entails the very famous 己所不欲勿施于人 don't do to others what you don't want to be done to. So that's one way to understand that, and this goes into a methodology problem that that's very dear to my heart, because I do a strictly analytic philosophy, but when I look, given the theoretical background, when I look to other texts and to learn from the wisdom of old philosophers from older times, sages, I think that the following is a very simple way to look across culture, which is, so Confucianism, the Analects, there are the people. Some people think that, so that makes Chinese philosophy an example of without argument, because they make the case. So what is Ren, and then Confucian will lay out a certain description about what it is without arguing for that. But then I think there's a difference between explanation and argument. So there are things that we think are right. So like helping someone falling into the well. And then we give an explanation about that, why it is wrong, but that's not an argument for that. There are common ground, oh, those things are wrong. And we're not here to argue whether that's a case of a Ren or Bu Ren. So if we have the common ground and given the, to take that as Confucius' wisdom, because in the end, there's something very to the point that there is another thing that typical or orthodox liberal would find strange, would be the cow case, the case in which you would not not because of justice, let's say, to rat out your own father who stole the lamb, and that partiality, and it goes back to xiao and partiality again, and Confucius makes a very quick point about those that are not xiao. They want disorder, chaos, and he just said that without any argument. And a hermeneutic point is that, so we take the wisdom of the ancients and try to find out how it is right, and to understand, but we understand those texts given a certain background theory. Given, I would say, a liberal background out of respect, mutual respect, and that it emphasizes on others' choices, treating others as an end in itself. That gives me a way to look back in those, especially the four notions that are very specifically Confucian. And another point about looking back at those texts is about whether the data, if we are to think about that as data, that those that are not xiao, those that are not filial, they are prone to violate those authority, and they crave for this disorder. If that's the case, it could be a psychological judgment of moral psychology, or even how he sees people, and we take that as data. But then there could be a situation in which he hasn't seen all that we have seen, like the Soviet choice scenario. So the way I would want to, I think, as an exercise in cross-cultural, and even especially looking back, because of the contemporary world we have developed after industrialization and technological advancement, those back in those days, I think they retain certain things that we might want to look back and see what would inform our present situation. And for example, the Soviet choice scenario, I don't think back in those days people would encounter a situation in which a soldier would coerce a mother to choose among killing one of the children almost randomly. And and that brings back to how Li isn't only a non-liberal, illiberal thing. Is that there is it is for freedom, it is for liberty, it is a way in which we when we grow up, well, of course, there's a whole, I think other people have other metaphysical theory about how rituals and propriety come about. Along all that line, how it remains till at least Confucius' time, it has an explanation why it stays. Of course, when we were young or even when we're older, we don't always understand how the tradition came about, why it is right, or maybe we one day maybe we have to question whether it's always right and whether there when certain way of doing things run into a problem. But at least that deference, that relation to elders, that's it has the liberal understanding. And let me see. Yeah. So right. So I think that's roughly what I want to bring out in my sharing of how, given my research in ethics and in analytic philosophy, and when I look at the ancient Chinese text, how we can learn from it's because in analytic philosophy, well, of course there are many like organizers of this conference, they would of course look at the ancient text, but I think we can, instead of trying to give argument for why certain philosophers said it's right, we can try to understand how it is right given their situation. Okay, so xiao, that's an orthodox liberal like John Stuart Mill, who thinks that a utilitarianism that's maximize well, happiness, but or maybe total welfare with impartiality. That's again, that's something that an orthodox liberal would think. But filial piety or filiality, xiao, I think as a liberal, we should permit others to care more about their own family. It's their own choice to care more about their family. So that's another thing that's Confucian that might seem like in contrary to a liberalism that's an all-out fairness that doesn't treat others with partiality, because that's again, that's something specifically Confucian. And one last thing would be harmony. 君子和而不同 and then 小人同而不和的 that harmony, because even though Confucian, the way we understand respect, the treating others as an end in itself, and if we were to act, because that Kantian or maybe a liberal understanding of how we are to do to others, that's an attitude, I think, out of respect. But what we do depends on situation, and maybe during the Confucian's time, of course, I'm sure that he has met people from with different backgrounds, but at least given today's world, we can look at how he not treating others as you don't want to be treated, as restricted to those that are similar to you, because well, let's say you don't want to eat with a knife and fork, but others do. Then if you when you serve other dinner, then there are cultural differences, and then interpersonal similarity in contrast to a difference that's another way that I think we can, if we are acting out of humanity with respecting differences, that's one way I think is also a liberal understanding of the Confucian harmony And yeah, so I think I won't be able to use all the time, but that's all I want to share. Thank you.